Hi there, welcome to another episode of the Bonsai Stuff podcast. Scott Martin from Bonsai Matsu, and I hope you've had a brilliant bonsai week. Hope you've been out there cleaning your tools, snipping on your trees, enjoying the time with them. We are coming into the last little section now of the formal summer. This will be some warm weather, obviously, as we head into the autumn/fall period, but it's on the horizon now. We're coming to the end, thank goodness, because it's been a hot summer this year for us in Melbourne. I've really noticed it a lot. I know that especially other capital cities around Australia too seem to have been flogged with extremes. We seem to be jumping around with hot, dry, and hot, humid weather, which is a bit difficult for everybody. Not only us, but also the trees. I find that they struggle a bit more when the temperature does that sort of thing. But looking around the yard, I always do a bit of an assessment as to see where things are at and what's doing well, what's not doing quite so well. And my pines, after decandling, are looking fantastic. They're loving this environment. Things are being watered quite consistently. On the cooler days, it's probably twice a day. On the warmer days, it's probably 4 times, maybe with a light sprinkle somewhere in between for just a cooling purpose. But the pines seem to be doing exceptionally well. There's buds everywhere. They're looking great, and they've gone from little buds now to starting to push the start of their needles, which is perfect timing. So very happy with how the pines are looking. Looking around at the deciduous, and with what I've seen come through the workshop and visiting around the place, there's definitely signs of heat stress now, which is completely normal. You're going to get to a hot summer like this and start to see the impact of it, the repercussions of this weather you've had. So don't start flogging yourself because things maybe aren't quite looking as lush as what you'd hoped with your deciduous. There might be some leaf burn issues because the temperatures have been extreme. The winds have been hot and dry, so you might find that there's an actual physical leaf burn on top of the leaf, especially around the apex area, in the middle of the leaf area. You might see a discoloration and slight browning. You might see on the tips where water can't get up there quick enough as well, or there's not enough water flowing through the tree. That sort of stuff's really, really normal at this stage. Any trees that are exhibiting those sort of symptoms, I try and put them into a more sheltered area. They might be sheltered already, but maybe just get them into the coolest spot in the yard, maybe under a nice big tree where you've got a bench or shade cloth tucked away, out of the wind, out of the exposure. Just baby them through, try and get them through until the cooler weather comes, and then, we can commence the feeding process again in autumn and build their strength back up again. So it's not the end of the world. Might affect the impact of how they look in autumn for the quality of the leaf, but that's something you can't avoid. So heat stress is completely normal this time of year. And I look around at the Australian natives, oh my goodness, you got to beat them down with a stick. They just won't stop growing. The hotter, the more humid, the drier, all the conditions that the exotics seem to really struggle with in my yard, and from what I've seen, the natives seem to be doing exceptionally well. I've seen different trees that have waited, maybe been struggling a little bit post some major work, and then they've waited till this warmer weather, and now they're starting to push all these buds and come back to normal. So it's amazing what these native species do, and I'll push it again. If you don't have Australian natives and you live in Australia in your collection, then it's really something that you've got to have to complement the other species. I think that when autumn comes around, you'll appreciate having deciduous in your collection as opposed to the natives. But definitely at times like this, I look around my yard and there's some that are flowering and others just look lush and full, and they just thrive. So that's really what you want. Anyway, let's get into this podcast. I want to talk today about it. I've got 2 things on the agenda for today. I want to talk about doing the maintenance. I talked about this in the last episode. I want to delve into that a little bit more with your trees and why it's really important to do the maintenance before you do any really serious kind of work with your trees. And I want to talk sort of a little bit holistically about why you got into bonsai, and more importantly, what keeps you in bonsai, which is the more important part. But anyway, let's get into it. So with the fire up of 2025, the workshops have been packed, like jam-packed, which is awesome. I love it. And there's been lots of visits, there's been lots of discussion, lots of messages coming through. And and there's been a common thread for a few things. So things have got a bit woolly, a bit bushy. Christmas break, things have grown. Maybe trees have been left for now to work on, like say the junipers, something like that. And it's one of the first things that gets asked of me is, should I cut that off? Should this one go? And it's like, yeah, but I don't know. Like, we can cut it off, yeah, definitely. But is it the right thing to do? Is it what's going to improve the tree? And it comes back to a common thread, I suppose, or a thought process that I have with every single tree. And I've been saying it over and over and over, for the last sort of 3-4 weeks. Do the maintenance. Do the stuff that has to be done first, and then look at the structural stuff. I know it can seem like it's a bit of a waste of time, or that you're working on something that's clearly going to be cut off, but it's bonsai, right? There's no rush. It's the process, and you want to make sure that when you do remove something, that it's perfect. It's exactly what you intended to do. It's not something that you go and cut off and then suddenly go, oh, hang on a minute, might have looked a bit better with that being back on there. Can't go backwards. Can't take that cut back and put it back on the tree. It's just not going to work that way. So I find that if you can just slow down a little bit, just draw a breath and do the maintenance, and that's the basics. That's the real stuff, like removing things that that are going to be removed from the tree, regardless of what this thing's going to look like. So, foliage growing backwards, maybe stuff that's growing straight down. There's different trees, different varieties that you'll do different things with, but pretty much the maintenance side of things all comes back to removing, the stuff that's growing in the armpits, the crutch growth, the stuff that's weakening those branches. If it's not going to be replacing a long branch, or it's growing underneath the pad, or it's growing back into the trunk line, something like that. And I know that it can be confusing, and I have talked about this before on the podcast, but it can be confusing when you see someone, a demonstrator, or someone on YouTube or anywhere, where they'll look at a piece of raw material, they'll look like they quizzed it for about 3 seconds, and they'll get their branch cutters out or saw, and then they'll just start hacking things off, and you'll go, wow, okay, how did they choose that? And I actually had this conversation just the other day with someone that, seeing someone do these things, it's like, yeah, but why did you do it? There's no discussion on why did you remove that branch? What was your thought process? And how do you justify that removal? And so you try and emulate these things. It might be someone that you admire their styling or their work, and you think, well, if they do it like that, then that's how I've got to do it. So I look at a tree and I go, yeah, bang, 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 cut these things off. But I think you're going about it the wrong way. Though I can tell you from experience that when you see those major cuts, when you see that dramatic, 3-second thought process where that person goes, yeah, cut, a lot's gone into that. You study the tree, you work out what you want to do, you just discover a plan on it, you think about how things are going to evolve and where branches are going to get placed on the design, and then you start removing things. So what you see is sort of 3 seconds of thought might have been, a week sitting there looking at that tree, or studying it over and over and over, and looking at photos and different angles, and maybe seeing it in the flesh as well, and saying, okay, well, if that one goes here, then that goes there. Regardless of that, let's say it is a 3-second thought process that person goes through, and they've trained for however many years to get it. Maybe you're just seeing the ones that turn out good. Maybe you're not seeing the duds that suddenly they cut things off and go, oh, now that's just ruined. I've just stuffed that tree up, put it aside, delete the video. That'll never be seen by anybody. Whatever it is, I don't think that you need to put yourself under pressure, no matter what stage you're at in your bonsai life. I don't think you need to put yourself under that kind of pressure to look at trees and decide to design them on that process. So I'll come back to the reason for this part of the podcast is do the maintenance. Do the basic stuff. At least then you'll have a clearer vision or a clearer idea of the path for the structure of this tree that you're working on. And whether it's one that's been designed, styled already, and suddenly got big and bushy, and you're looking at things going, no, that's too full, I need to thin it out a little bit. Let me just thin this first. No, I wouldn't think thinning first is the right thing to do. I always think if you can do the maintenance like that cleanup process, get your shaping done on your pads or whatever it is that you want to do. And then if it's still too thick after that process, then start the thinning process. Okay, so thinning is one of the last things that I do, because I can get the silhouette of my tree and I can look at it and go, that's beautiful, that's the shape that I want. But I can look at certain parts, maybe around the apex of the tree, or it might be particular branches, and look at them and go, those branches are still too thick. But the shape, the profile that I've got on that section of the bonsai is bloody spot on. It's perfect. So I don't want to destroy that. So then my thinning process will be to remove certain parts of the foliage that don't impact on the silhouette of that particular part of the tree. And I hope that makes sense. So it's maintenance, clear out what you have to get rid of, style and shape, get the profile, get the shape that you want of the tree, wire it, put it into position, and then start doing that thinning process, or the clean out, lightening of the foliage. If you jump too far ahead in the process and you start removing what you believe to be unnecessary, it might be that when you do all that process, you've got holes in your design, or suddenly your structure becomes way too flat, which is really common. Now, instead of having a voluminous pad, something that sort of comes up and goes down again, back to front or front to back, whichever way, you end up with something that looks like a bit of a saucer, a bit of a plate, because you've gone and cut everything out of there that's growing straight up. Yeah, I don't know if that's necessarily the right thing to do, because when you look at really nice bonsai, you've got to have that volume where you have your base of your structure, and then you build up on top of that. And that building up is normally, in my experience, what gets cut out very early days when you're doing your thinning process on the tree. It's too thick, so I'm cutting this out. And then suddenly, by the time you get to wiring the tree, it hasn't taken a step forward from when you worked on it the previous time, because you're back to a very flattened structure. The trunk might have got a little bit older. The branches might have some secondary branching in there, but you've got no volume on your pads. So it's just a word of advice that I think if you can do the maintenance on your trees first and foremost, and make sure that you can then see the structure of what you're dealing with, then start the cutting off. You can always cut things off later. Impossible to put them back on, but you can always cut them off later. So don't put yourself under pressure that you have to jump towards the end part. Do the maintenance and then continue on with the design of the bonsai. Now, when I first started bonsai, I was fascinated. I was thinking about this to prepare for the podcast, and I remember the process. I remember the intrigue and how I got my first one, and sort of that it kicked it off, and then it sort of lulled, and then it kicked back in again. And I was trying to think to myself, what was the point that got you, for want of a better word, obsessed with trees in pots? And I was intrigued as to the beauty of these things. Like, that was the artistic side, but it was also the fascination with being able to keep something which can grow to so big in the ground in a miniature form in a pot. It's like I was absolutely intrigued as to how that would happen. And I was thinking about it as a restriction thing, knowing now that I was completely wrong about how I went about it, but it was that fascination that really drew me in. The love of trees, the beauty of these things, seeing them and looking at them and going, wow, it's just like it's a small tree. Like I'd look out into a park or something, or you go for a walk into a national park and you'd see these trees and go, wow, that looks like that tree that I saw. Or that's just, it was all that linking with beauty, but in miniature. That fascinated me. But now that's not what keeps me in bonsai. So I always break bonsai into two main streams, and it's the horticultural and it's the artistic side of it. And for me, it's a little bit of both that I really enjoy. Like, I love spending time doing the horticultural stuff with the trees, the basics, the care for them and the maintenance. but doing all of the stuff that keeps them strong and healthy, regardless of what they look like. I really enjoy that part. I love watering. I love it. I love fertilizing the trees. I love seeing the impact of fertilizing. I love the pest and fungal inspections, and then coming up with plans to correct them and or maintain them at certain levels. I really find that that really satisfying for me. And then the artistic side, I love the artistic side. I love that, being able to sort of help this tree in a pot become this magnificent bonsai that may never happen in my lifetime, but it's got steps to put it along the path. So that's what I find is really interesting. And so where I started with it, with intrigue, to now this complete satisfaction that I get and reward, intrinsic reward that I get for just spending time with them. It just makes me sort of glow on the inside, I suppose. And I do have ambitions. I do have drive. I do have a desire to see how far I can take something and how good it can possibly become. And like I said, I've always said, my drive is to always make the world's best bonsai. That's what pushes me, and it keeps me in the game. It'll be something that I never stop, because I don't think it's ever attainable, but it keeps me in the game and keeps me interested and keeps me motivated and keeps me pushing. But I think that sometimes when I talk to a lot of different people all around the globe about different things, I find that you can sometimes lose sight of what makes you happy with bonsai, and the reason why you started in the first place. And it's nice just to spend a little bit of time having a cup of coffee, having a beer, having a glass of wine, whatever it is, and just a glass of water, and just draw a breath and think to yourself, what is it that I started bonsai for? Like, look back. It doesn't matter whether you're a brand new beginner, that's jumping out of your skin and you're collecting seeds and you got 4 trillion seedling trays growing, and you think that that'll never be enough, and it's okay, I can manage to have 5,000 seedlings that are all about 3 centimeters tall. Yep, good luck. You might be a few years in and suddenly your skill levels come up. You might be getting a really strong grasp on the horticultural side, but the artistic side and the technique is something that you're really working on and you're focusing on, and ensuring that part is where you're starting to now, you're fine-tuning the horticultural, making the small little differences that add up over time. But it's the technique and the design side that you're really trying to get your head around. You might be an old dog. You might be someone who's done bonsai forever, that you seem to have the horticultural side wrapped up to a certain extent. There might be little bits of improvement here and there. The artistic side, you've got a very clear focus on what it is that's your style, that how you design trees, the type of species that you like in your collection. You might love only Australian natives. You might only love deciduous. You might only love junipers, whatever it is. But you're really clear in your own thought process exactly what it is that you do with bonsai. It's your signature. It's how you're known in the bonsai community. It's how your mates know you, and that's cool. That's great. But I think it's really important at times I've found it really important and quite therapeutic, to be honest, to go back and think, okay, so what was that? Because it's not something that you think about every day. Like, I don't think when I'm walking around my yard every single day watering, going, oh, what was it? What was the reason? What did you enjoy when you first started bonsai? What was the driver that actually made you go, you know what, this is going to become part of who I am. This is part of Scott Martin. I am now dedicated to bonsai for the rest of my life. Like, it's something that will be with me forever, regardless. I hope to be 95, not out, and still spending time looking at my trees and watering them, and maybe doing some major trunk bending. Who knows? Let's see. But it's honest to God. It's I don't need to have a tattoo to say I love bonsai to show on my chest that this is who I am. And I found it really, really like quite a nice journey to look back and say to myself, do you remember that time? Do you remember that when you first walked in and you got that first pot and your first little tree, and you didn't know how to tie the thing in, and that vision, that memory just jumped back to me. And I've got I don't know if shocking memories the right thing. I can remember a lot about trees. I can remember a lot about working on trees, But there's lots of parts of my life, that childhood, growing up, and family times or whatever, that you sort of go, when someone brings up, you go, oh yeah, I think I remember that. But someone walks into the workshop 3 years after last seeing him, and they put the tree on. It's like, I remember when we bent that branch and we did this and we cut that off, and look at it now. Look what's happened to it. It's sort of etched into my brain and burnt onto my scon as to with all these things. And I think it's really a valid thing that you look back on your own bonsai journey, and I found that it brought a lot of joy to me. It made me sit and think. It definitely makes me, when I talk to other people about it, maybe that are at that, I'll put myself in the old dog category, but they might be a fresh beginner that's just walking in the door, and they're sort of bubbling out of their skin, and it'd be so easy and so wrong to say, hey, listen, just settle down. Whereas I find that enthusiasm now for me is infectious, where it re-sparks and reignites for me, doing bonsai from scratch, and looking at all the things that you've got to learn, and the path that you've got to go on. And there's so many of those moments along that journey where your eyes get opened to new things, and you suddenly go, there it is. That's that piece of the puzzle that I didn't even know that I needed, but it's going to help me so much along this whole path, my whole journey. I see it day in, day out, to be honest. And one of the best eye-opening experiences that I see continually, year on year on year, is post repotting, when you can convince, because that's really what it is. You have to convince someone that the soil mix that they're using might need to be changed, and to change that importance level from just what you see as to what you don't see with your bonsai, that makes such a big difference to everything. And it always starts as that, oh yeah, look, I'll give it a go. But then sort of a year down the track, it becomes one of those key important moments for everybody. And in my workshop, I have groups of people come in there, and when it comes around to repotting, or comes, someone new comes in to talk about different things, a lot of people like to share the fact that a real turning point in their whole bonsai life, and the turning point in their bonsai, was repotting, and the big change that made. And that's brilliant. And I see that all the time when someone learns wiring techniques. It's a bit of a trial and error. It's a bit bumbly. It's awkward. You can show them, and they're like, oh, you make it look so easy. And it's like, yeah, because I repeat this thing 1,000 times. I do the same thing over and over and over. And if you did it 1,000 times, then you'd be like this. And I can see the evolution of people along their journey, where they will start doing things a certain way, and you're like, yeah, that's okay, but let's do it a bit better, and it gets better and better and better. And so I can see that evolution of things, especially with techniques and pruning practices, wiring and shaping, decision making when it comes to the artistic side. That's all stuff that gets learnt along the journey. I don't think that anyone ever walks into bonsai going, I know everything. I've got it all down pat. I don't care which stream you're looking at, horticultural or artistic. You've never got the whole thing down pat, because what we do is pretty unique. And we're dealing not with pot plants, we're dealing with trees in pots, and they require a real special set of skills that takes time. And it's, you can drop it all on a piece of paper. Someone can read something, walk out the end of it and go, yeah, cool, I know everything. No, I don't think you will. That's where these books, there's so many different bonsai books out there on the market, and I don't think that any of them give you the golden ticket as to how to do bonsai thoroughly. And maybe whoever's written the book, and this is no disrespect, but whoever's written the book has done it with every intention that they will give you that information, and maybe in their little part of the world and in their garden, yep, sure, I think that might be close to being correct, but there's a certain amount of information that you take in slowly over time, and you need to see results for that to sort of start to embed, and you need to practice things over and over and over. tying trees into pots, it doesn't just happen overnight. It's something that you've got to practice and get right. Putting wire onto a branch so it moves a certain way, that takes time and thought process. Using carving tools, that's a whole nother that's a whole nother conversation. But that in itself is a real skill. And one of the first things that people do with bonsai is tear out to a hardware store and pick up a Dremel and think, yep, I've got bonsai, I've got to be able to carve. And it's a skill in itself. And in fact, I might talk. I've been carving a few things lately, and I might talk a little bit about some carving advice for using the machinery. I might talk about that in the next podcast, next episode. So have a listen for that. But there's a lot to from where you started is a lovely reflection, but also look at where you're at now. But I think that for me, like I said, I found it really reinvigorating to think back about that first couple of trees, that first couple of steps, and they're definitely not with me. I've managed to successfully move them on to the next bonsai garden in the world, but they definitely, those memories stay with me, and it just made me look at my trees differently, made me appreciate my garden just a little bit more, and knowing and looking back along progress that you've made is a really positive thing. So it's nice to sit back and think what first got you into bonsai all those years ago. So what does the next week of bonsai entail for me at Bonsai Matsu? What am I going to be doing? What I think everyone should be starting to get ready for is fertilising. We're back to that lovely old topic, that time when you get to upset your neighbours because of the stink, but you know that it does so much good for your trees. So I know that over the next week I'm going to start pulling my finger out, getting ready for March, for autumn, for the time when that fertilising starts to kick off for my trees, for strength building. Now there'll be a little bit of foliage growth, but there'll be a lot of strength building coming over that period as well. As the temperatures start to tail off, hopefully they start to tail off. And I'll talk more about fertilising down the track, but that's definitely what I'm going to start preparing for now, making sure that I've got the components, that I've got everything ready to go. So when it comes around, I don't want to have to rush last minute and try and get everything ready to make sure that I can get the fertiliser out there for the trees. I like to be prepared. I like to plan. I like to have the process all done so it takes the pressure off. So that's definitely what I'm going to be working on in the next week. I'm also going to be trying to finish off the last little bit of my juniper work around the yard. There's still a few more major ones that I've got to get into and shape and style and clean out and get them back on the bench ready to go. Look, everything's looking great. Everything's looking lush. They're a bit thick, bit dense, a bit long and shaggy. So I just need to allocate some time to myself to sit there with the trees, and there'll be plenty more workshops and that sort of stuff as well happening around the place, which is really, really great. I love it. Really enthusiastic. So just a couple of things. Keep an eye out for this flash weather. As I said, we've in Melbourne, we're copping some pretty hot days and then down to cooler days and then back to hot days, and it's really fluctuating all over the joint. And there's flooding up north, which must be causing absolute havoc. And I can't stop thinking about the people that have got bonsai up in northern Australia, in northern Queensland, that are getting flogged with rain at the moment. And it just seems to be more upon more rain coming. So my heart goes out to you, to be honest. And I think about people in West Australia that are getting flogged with constant temperatures in the very high 30s and 40s for the last 4 or 5 weeks. It's got to be tough on your trees. And I think about the species of tree that we keep, and it always plays on my mind because we're fairly lucky in Melbourne that we get the summers. Yeah, they're hot, but they're not exhaustingly hot like other places. We do get some humidity as well as the dry. We do get the cold without getting the freezing and the snow. So the range of trees that we can sort of keep in Melbourne is quite extensive. But when I look around the country and I see the extremes that other parts are copping, it's definitely got to be something which plays upon your mind, because end of summer early autumn, you may be seeing some pretty disastrous damage to some of the trees in your yard, I'd assume, at times. Yeah, they may have made it through, but year on year, this sort of stuff takes its toll. And there'll be certain species that you'll look at and go, gee, that's doing really well. And there's other ones that you'll look at and go, they just get monstered. For instance, Japanese maples in that hot, dry heat of Perth, I couldn't imagine any ever growing there ever, because they will not survive no matter what you do, unless you've got an artificial environment. And if you do, fantastic. But the general population, I don't think would be focusing on that. So it's always timely for me to look around the yard now and think, I look at some of the deciduous that maybe are on the verge, of things not going right. It's like, okay, so what can I change for next year? Is it environmental? Do I need to look at where that tree's positioned? Does it need to be more sheltered? Does it, can something swap with it that maybe needs to be a bit more exposed? Some more of the natives, but it definitely, at the harsh times of the environment, we all, every garden, every bonsai can survive when things are great. During sort of spring and autumn, they're fine. Like, you won't have it. But on the extremes of heat and cold, those certain trees may not do so well. Like, I always find that larch, they do great during the winter, the cooler months. As soon as we get to something hot and dry, forget it. They just get cooked. Somewhere that's 20 minutes up the road, that's got a higher altitude, that's got cooler temperatures, they do great. They thrive. Awesome, fantastic. So I think it's probably viable. Well, definitely is not probably. It's definitely viable to look through your collection now. Don't be disheartened if there's things that look like they're turning pear-shaped. It just might be that you need to review your collection, that you have a look through and see what's doing well, and those things that have done well year on year on year. Maybe you haven't had them year on year. Maybe this is the first summer that you've gone through with your trees. It's definitely something that you should look to and take that thought out of your head that, okay, I really love this species and I'm going to get that species, because whatever that species is, if it's not thriving in your garden now, then there's a bloody good chance that when next summer comes around, it's going to do even more damage. So look at what does well in your garden. Fall in love with those species and make that the focus of what you do around your yard. Anyway, that's my 2 cents worth now, because late summer is a time that I definitely have a look around the yard and you start to see things that have gone wrong. You may not necessarily see them all now. It might not be till next spring when you look at the trees and suddenly there's been a lot of dieback, a lot of that growth that's maybe been a bit cooked. It's still hanging on for dear life. There might be some viable buds on it, but by the time it gets to spring next year, sap's withdrawn, branches have gone all dry, and they'll get knocked off. That's when you start to see the damage that's been caused through the summer period. Well, I love the warm weather. I love the beach. I love being warm. I love swimming. But I can tell you that by the time it gets to about now, looking at the trees, it's like, come on, that's enough. we need to turn the dial down a little bit here. Everything needs a bit of a break, and I'm doing everything I possibly can to cool things down, but it's just not enough. It's not enough for the trees in the yard, and it just needs to be something that you focus on maybe a little bit more. Righto, bonsai lovers, we're done. That's our podcast all wrapped up for episode 5, season 7 in 2025. I do hope that you're enjoying your trees at the moment. I do hope that things are going really well for you, that all your plans that you put in place, from repotting, from watering, from fertilising, from strength building, all that focus, all that attention is really, really coming to a fore. If they're not, then look at what you can improve. Look at what you can do, what you can implement for your trees for next summer, and start planning for it. Start thinking about it. Start putting things in place and go, you know what, that tree's really struggling. That's got to be repotted. Flag it. Make sure that it doesn't get missed next year. Anything that's struggling now might be looking great by the time it comes to repotting season or whatever it is. But don't lose sight of where it's at right now, because now is when it's at its worst. Now is when it's going to be suffering the most. So you want to make sure that doesn't happen again next year. Summer's a great teacher for deficiencies or for holes in your system, whether it be your watering system, your fertilizing program, and you've got to be honest. You've got to have a good hard look at yourself and look backwards and say, okay, did I fertilize everything properly? And if you did fertilize everything properly, is it in the right soil? Have the roots grown as they should have to take up those nutrients? Has my watering been fine, or have there been days where I've let it get a little bit too dry and then I've come back and I've tried to make amends for it? Anyway, whatever it is, just do an assessment of your whole yard, and this is the time where you're going to start seeing things. Don't flog yourself that if it hasn't turned out exactly the way you wanted, because all of us are looking at trees that may be suffering heat stress at this time of the year. It's completely normal. We just do the best we possibly can with what we've got. Definitely time to go out there and give your trees a cuddle, though. They need it. They're getting tired. Like I said earlier, start preparing for fertilising coming up in a very short period of time, a couple of weeks. That's going to be starting to roll out, and make sure that you're there to build your trees back up and build the strength of them, and make sure that they thrive through that next process. Thank you for listening in. As always, I love it. Thank you very much to subscribers. Wholeheartedly, you are part of Bonsai Matsu, and you keep this thing rocking and rolling. So thank you very much. I love you all dearly. Until next time, happy bonsai.